Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to lecture 3 on ecosystem. So in the last lecture, we studied what is ecosystem and what are different aspects of an ecosystem. So in the last discussion, we discussed about energy flow, how energy gets transferred from one trophic level to the organisms at the another trophic level, what law does it follows, and what amount of energy does get transferred from the organisms at lower trophic level to the organisms at higher trophic levels. So in the last lecture, we get to know that about the food chain and the food web, how different organisms are interdependent on each other for their food. And ultimately, all the organisms are actually, even the plants are dependent on the detritivores or the decomposers for the supply of the inorganic nutrients by the process of decomposition. So this is how each and every organism in the ecosystem is interdependent on each other, and the energy flows within the ecosystem through the transfer of the food in the form of the food from one trophic level to the another trophic level. So today's lecture, we will learn about the different types of the ecological pyramids and how different species emerges during the time of evolution during the process of succession. So in today's lecture, we will learn about different ecological pyramids and what is an ecological succession, how new species emerged in or inhabit an area, and therefore leads to the development of a climax community. So starting with the how the energy flows. So this is just a brief overview of what we discussed in the last lecture. So this is an overview of energy and the nutrient dynamics in an ecosystem. So we know that sun is the source of energy for all the organisms that are present on the earth. So the energy which is provided by the sun, or the energy enters into the ecosystem through the harnessing by the primary producers that harnesses this solar energy. So the energy flow in this diagram is represented by the orange arrows, while the chemical cycling is represented by the blue arrows. So energy enters, flows through and exit an ecosystem, whereas chemical nutrients or the cycle of the chemical nutrients primarily reside within the ecosystem only. So there is in case of energy flow, there is an entrapment of energy, there is a utilization, and then there is a release of energy back into the environment. But if I talk about the nutrients or the chemical cycling, the chemical nutrients enters the cycle, and once they enter, they are just recycled within this ecosystem only. So in this generalized scheme, the energy which is represented by the dark orange arrows enters from the sun as radiation and moves this chemical energy transfers through the food web and exit in the form of the heat and is irradiated back into the space. So this is how the energy flows into an ecosystem. So the energy which is harnessed by the plants that are present at the level of primary producers, they harnesses this solar energy. This solar energy is then utilized by the plants to produce the food products, or the plant products, or the plant itself are eaten by the primary consumers, which are mainly herbivores. These primary consumers are then eaten up by the secondary or the tertiary consumers. So this is how the energy is transferred. Beside this, the decomposition of these primary producers, consumers, or the secondary and tertiary consumers occurs by the microorganism, by the action of microorganisms and other detritivores, and therefore this is from there they take up this energy in the form of the dead food and break down the complex substances into the simpler inorganic nutrients, which are then again taken up by the plants. So the most transfers of nutrients, which is represented by the blue arrows through the trophic levels, lead eventually to the detritus. So most of the nutrients are eventually reach to the detritus. The nutrients then cycle back to the primary producers, as I mentioned. So the detritus or the detritivores actually break down the complex substances. It present in the dead leaves, dead plants, animals, or the consumers. And by the action of the enzyme, they broke down these complex substances. Once upon the breaking of these complex substances or upon the decomposition, these complex substances are gets converted into the inorganic nutrients and are released into the soil. These inorganic nutrients are then further again taken up by the primary producers, thereby entering the ecosystem or thereby entering the cycle again without getting released into the atmosphere. So we know that like different types of ecosystem can be understand through different pyramids that we know that are known as the ecological pyramids. We know that if I try to make you visualize the shape of a pyramid, we know that it's something, the base of the pyramid is broad, and as we move towards the apex, it becomes narrower. So we also get a similar kind of shape when we try to express the food or energy relationship between the organisms that are present at different trophic levels. So therefore, this relationship, which is expressed either in terms of numbers, or we may express it in terms of biomass, or the energy which is present at each trophic level. So this relationship may be expressed in the terms of number, biomass, and energy. And the base of each pyramid represents the producers, which are the first trophic level, while the apex represents the tertiary or top level consumer. So if I move from the bottom to the top of any pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid will be represented by the producers or the organisms at the first trophic level. That is the primary producers or the plants. And as I move towards the apex, I'll keep moving towards each of the trophic levels, like from the primary producers to the primary consumers, then to the secondary consumers, and then tertiary consumers or the top consumers. So since we know that the relationship between the organisms at different trophic levels can be expressed either in terms of number, biomass, or energy, therefore, there are usually three types of ecological pyramids that are basically studied. So the first one is the pyramid of number, the second one is the pyramid of biomass, and third one is the pyramid of energy. So pyramid of number, it's very easy to understand that it tells us about the number of organisms that are present at each trophic level. So basically, pyramid of number expresses the number, or it is a representation of number of organisms that are present at each trophic level. While the pyramid of biomass express the biomass of organisms at any given trophic level, and the pyramid of energy represents the amount of energy that is present in the particular trophic level. So starting with the pyramid of numbers, this is a representation of a pyramid of numbers in a grassland ecosystem. So we know usually in case of grassland ecosystem, if I consider this is a representation of the numbers on the right hand side are just the arbitrary numbers for the representation or for the sake of convenience to understand it. So the different bars in this pyramid actually represents the different trophic levels. So from this pyramid of number of grassland ecosystem, we can understand easily that the producers which are present at the bottom of this pyramid are the maximum in number, and then after at each trophic level, the number of organisms are decreasing. So such pyramids are known as the upright pyramid, where the base, that is the producers, are form a broad base, and the pyramid gets narrower at the apex, representing the tertiary consumer. So such pyramids are known as the upright pyramids. This I am telling because later in this lecture we will get to know about a different kind of pyramid which is known as the inverted pyramids, where the base is narrower as compared to the apex. So therefore, the pyramid of number in a grassland ecosystem. This is very important to understand that this I am talking, this is a representation, or this particular pyramid is an example of a grassland ecosystem. So this is the pyramid of number in a grassland ecosystem is an upright pyramid where the number of producers are more than the number of primary consumers. Similarly, the number of primary consumers are higher than the secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers are very few in number. So this is how the pyramids or the ecological pyramids are represented, are built using different representations. So, for example, in this case, we can see that only 3 top carnivores are supported in an ecosystem based on the production of nearly 6 million plants. So, the number is also defined, the number of any organism at any trophic level is also defined by the capability of an ecosystem to take up those number of organisms. So, basically, we know that this we can also relate with the amount of energy that gets transferred, as we discussed in the last lecture also, that since the amount of energy that gets transferred from one trophic level to the another trophic level is just the 10% of the previous trophic level, therefore it is very important that the numbers of organisms at higher trophic levels remain few, so that they can get enough supply of energy or enough amount of food, so that they can have enough amount of energy, so that they can produce enough amount of energy that they can easily survive. So therefore, in this case, we can see that as we move on from one trophic level, that is from the lower trophic levels like producers, to the higher trophic levels, that is towards the tertiary consumer, the number of organisms or the number of individuals in that ecosystem at that particular trophic level decreases. However, there are certain cases where the pyramid of number is not upright, just as we discussed in case of grassland ecosystem, but it can be an inverted pyramid or it is sometimes a spindle-shaped pyramid. So the inverted pyramids are the ones where, as I mentioned, that in case of inverted pyramids, the base is narrower while the the apex is broad. So since the base in the ecological pyramid is always represented by the producers, so the example of inverted pyramids may be the organisms, maybe the pyramid of number for the organisms that resides on a tree. So we know that in this case, we may consider that, for example, if we consider a scene where a tree is an ecosystem, on which various birds, insects inhabited and survive and reproduce. So considering the number of organisms at each trophic level, how could we calculate? So we will first see that there is a single tree. So the producer number will be 1. While we may found that there might be 5, 6 types of birds that will be present on that tree. So considering that as an arbitrary number like n is equal to 6 or 7, then we may have different parasites that are present. So this is the kind of parasites that resides on a particular tree. So this pyramid of number is inverted, especially in those cases where the parasites resides on a particular tree. So the parasites will be more in number, as there might be 2 or 3 parasites that may be present on the herbivores residing on that tree. Then there will be hyperparasites that will again be higher in number. So therefore, in such cases, the pyramid of number will be inverted. So unlike the upright pyramid, which we discussed in a grassland ecosystem, which is very easy to understand, there are certain cases where the pyramid of number may be inverted. This is in the case of parasitic system where the parasites are the part of the food chain. But but there is another type of pyramid of number that is present. Example, spindle shaped pyramids. So in spindle shaped pyramids, firstly the base of the pyramid is narrow, then it becomes broad, and then again at the apex it becomes narrower. So this is an example where, for example, where there is a single tree, and on that single tree, let's say 7 to 8 birds are residing, and then there is a carnivore which feeds on these birds. So there might be one or two carnivore that will be present on the same tree. So this is an example of a spindle-shaped tree, spindle-shaped pyramid of number, where the pyramid of number at the base is narrower, then it becomes broad, and then it becomes narrower at the apex again. So it is not always like that the ecological pyramids are always upright, although it is true in some cases that we will see later. But in other cases, it might be possible that the pyramid of number is not upright, but is actually inverted or spindle shaped. So different shape of the pyramid depends upon the type of the pyramid which we are discussing, and also the type of the ecosystem about which we are talking. So this is for example, this may be a homework for you as well, that if I talk about the aquatic ecosystem, try to draw a pyramid of number. Maybe you will get some different type of pyramid. The next is the pyramid of biomass. We know what is a biomass. So biomass, we discussed in the first lecture that it is the amount of the mass or of the organisms that are present at particular trophic level. So similar to the pyramid of numbers, the pyramid of biomass can be both upright as well as inverted. So in case of upright pyramids, for example, if I talk about a Florida bog, for example, so the pyramid of biomass is upright, where the dry mass of the primary producers is higher than the primary consumers, which have a higher biomass as compared to the secondary consumers that actually have higher biomass than the tertiary consumers. While on the other hand, if I talk about the aquatic ecosystem, as I discussed in the last slide also, that the type of the pyramid, the shape of the pyramid depends on the type of the ecosystem as well. So when we know that, so we can say that the pyramid of biomass is actually maybe upright, as we say in case of a Florida bog, or we can say in case of a grassland ecosystem. But the pyramid of biomass in case of aquatic ecosystem is inverted. So this is because the primary producers, the phytoplanktons, have a small standing crop of primary producers, that is the phytoplanktons, that supports a large standing crop of primary consumers, that is zooplanktons. So the cases, especially in case of aquatic ecosystem, the amount of biomass or the biomass of the primary consumers is usually higher than the primary producers. Therefore, inverting the shape of the pyramid, where the base is narrower and as we move towards the apex, it becomes broad. So this is very important to remember, that in what cases or in what scenario, it is very important to understand that in what type of ecosystem, which kind of pyramid will be. The next is the pyramid of energy. So unlike the pyramid of number or the pyramid of biomass that can be both upright or can be both inverted, the pyramid of energy is always upright. There is no example where the pyramid of energy is inverted, because we know that primary producers are the one that harness the energy. Also, we know about a 10% law where law of heat transfer, where we know that the amount of energy that gets transferred from the organisms at the primary trophic level to the organisms at the higher trophic level or the secondary trophic level is 10% of the previous level. So therefore, the pyramid of energy is always upright and can never be inverted, as the amount of energy is always decreasing as we move from one step to the another step. So, for example, if I consider this as example, so suppose producers harnesses 10,000 joule of energy. So this 10,000 joule of energy which is harnessed by the producers, only the 10% of it is transferred to the primary consumers. Of 10% of this 1,000 joule, 10% is transferred to the secondary consumers, and of this only 10% will be transferred to the tertiary consumers. That is, so we understand that as we move from one trophic level or the lower trophic level towards the higher trophic level, the amount of energy will always decrease in accordance with the 10% law. So therefore, the pyramid of energy is always upright and therefore can never be inverted. Because when energy flows from a particular trophic level to the next trophic level, some energy is always lost in the form of heat, and the basically some energy is always lost in the form of heat. Thereby, it is not possible that the organisms at higher trophic levels will have more amount of energy as compared to the organisms at the lower trophic level. So this was about the ecological pyramids. So ecological pyramids gives us an idea about how different organisms, or what is the relationship of different organisms within an ecosystem. And it tells us about the number, biomass, or the energy that is present at each trophic level in any ecosystem. So basically these ecological pyramids provide quite a good idea about the conditions that may be prevailing in that ecosystem. However, there are certain limitations to these ecosystems, to the pyramids, to the study of these pyramids of ecosystem. So firstly, it does not take into account the same species that may belong to two or more trophic levels. So suppose if I am counting the biomass of any one species at second trophic level, it might be possible that in case of a food web or a food chain, that same organism now becomes the secondary consumer and is now present at the now become a tertiary consumer and is now present at the third trophic level or the fourth trophic level. So thereby changing the biomasses in the different trophic levels. So therefore, it does not take into the account the same species belonging to two or more trophic levels. Also, this ecological, while making these ecological pyramids, we just consider the simple food chain, which is nearly like something that almost never exists in nature, as we discussed in the last lecture also, that it is very difficult that a simple food chain exists in nature, because in nature, usually what we study is food web, where one organism is interdependent on the other, and similarly this interdependency is reflected in different food chains as well, and these interconnections of different food chain is known as the food web. So this ecological pyramids does not consider the food chain or does not accommodate for the food web, but it actually considers that in an ecological pyramid only a simple food chain is something that runs, which is actually not true, as the simple food chain is something that almost never exists in the nature. Moreover, we know about the saprophytes, but the saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in the ecosystem. So, although ecological pyramids provide a good idea about the ecosystem, about the nature of the organisms of the ecosystem, about their physical and chemical, about their different, about the possibility of their number, about the nature of the ecosystem. It tells a lot, but still there are certain limitations to the study of these ecological pyramids. Repeating them once again. So firstly, it does not consider the same species that belongs to the two or more trophic levels. Secondly, it assumes a simple food chain. That is something that almost never exists in nature, and it does not accommodate a food web. Moreover, the saprophytes are not given any place in the, while considering for the ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in the ecosystem. The next topic is the ecological succession. So we know that an important characteristic of all the communities is that they keep on changing constantly and in response to the changing environmental conditions. So the characteristic of all communities is that their composition and structure does not remain constant, and it keeps on changing constantly in response to the changes in the environmental conditions. So as the environmental conditions changes, there is a change in the composition and structure of the communities, and this change is orderly and sequentially parallel with the changes in the physical environment. So we know that the survival of a community is not only on the basis of the other organisms, but is dependent on the various abiotic factors as well, like soil, water, temperature, etc. So the soil, water, temperature, light also influences the survival of the organisms in a particular community. So the changes in these physical conditions make an effect on the composition and structure of the community that needs to be changed in accordance with these with the changes in the physical environment. So the changes in the composition and structure of terrestrial communities are most apparent after some severe disturbances. For example, if there is a volcanic eruption or a glacier strips away all the existing vegetation. So these changes lead finally to a community that is in near equilibrium with the environment, and that is called as a climax community. So climax community is the one that remains almost in an equilibrium with the environment, and therefore is the most stable community, and the one that that has survived that survived that has survived these harsh conditions and is the ultimate community for that particular ecosystem. So the disturbed area, for example, the one which undergo volcanic eruption, may be colonized by a variety of species. These species are then gradually replaced by the other species, and which in turn replaced by still another species. So this is the process where after the disruption, one species starts habitating that area, then that species is eliminated or gradually replaced by the other species. Then next better species come and replace that previous species. So this is the process of succession, which is known as a ecological succession. So in that ecological succession, the disturbed area may be colonized by a variety of species. These species are gradually with time replaced by other species, which in turn are replaced by still other species. And finally, leading to a community that is in near equilibrium with the environment, which is known as the climax community. And the entire sequence of communities that successively changes in a given area are called as series. So starting with the pioneer species, we have different series where the different communities, sequence of communities that successively change in a given area are known as series. And then there we have a climax community at the end. The individual transitional communities are termed serial stages or serial communities. So the transitioning stages or the transitioning communities are known as the serial stages or the serial communities that keeps on gradually changing. And in the successive serial stage, there is a change in the diversity of species of organisms. So obviously, when one species is replaced by the another species, there is a change in the diversity of species of organisms. There is increase in the number of species and organisms as well, and ultimately there is an increase in the total biome. The present day communities in the world have come to be because of succession that has occurred over millions of years since the life started on the earth. So we can say that at that time when the life was starting on the earth, at that time the succession and evolution would have been the parallel process where the changes in the environment was rapid, and these rapid changes lead to the gradual replacement of different species and ultimately producing a climax community that has better stability in that particular ecosystem. So these succession and evolution would have been a parallel process at that time when the life was getting started on the earth. So we can say that succession is a process that starts in an area where no living organisms are there, or where the organisms that were actually residing earlier, now it's a barren land due to some disturbances like volcanic eruptions, etc. These could be areas where no living organisms ever existed, say bare rock, or in areas that somehow lost all the living organisms that existed there. So based on this, whether the area was already inhabited and lost its organisms, or the area has never been inhabited or no living organism ever existed in that particular area. So based on that particular thing, the succession can be divided into broadly two types. Firstly, the primary succession. The second one is the secondary succession. So when the process of succession begins in a virtually lifeless area where soil has not yet formed, such as on a new volcanic island or on the rubber moraine left by a retreating glacier, it is called as the primary succession. So the primary succession begins when at the place where there is no life ever existed, where the soil is not yet formed, and ultimately, therefore, we can say that the primary succession will definitely take more time as compared to the secondary succession, where there was an already existing community that has been cleared by some disturbances that leaves the soil intact. So the soil is intact, so there is a scope for the growth of the producers, and therefore the scope for rapid changes in the communities and the formation of a climate. So the primary succession is comparatively slow as compared to the secondary succession because the soil has not yet even formed, and therefore the scope for the producers is very less. So examples of areas where primary succession occurs are newly cooled lava, bare rock, newly created pond or reservoir. The establishment of a new biotic community is generally slow, and before a biotic community of diverse organisms can become established, there must be some soil. So depending mostly on the climate, it takes natural process several hundred to several thousand years to fertilize the soil on bare. And once when the soil is formed, the producers there is a possibility for the producers to grow, and then there is a possibility that it can inhabit the consumers. So therefore, the primary succession is very slow process, and it requires the establishment of a new biotic community, thereby making it slow. The secondary succession, on the other hand, begins in the areas where natural biotic communities have been destroyed, such as abandoned farmlands, burnt or cut forests, lands that have been flooded. Now, we know that in case of the primary succession, the soil has not yet even been formed. But in case of secondary succession, since some soil or sediment is present, succession is faster than the primary succession. So secondary succession is faster as compared to the primary succession. And the description of the ecological succession usually focuses on the changes in the vegetation. However, these vegetational changes in turn affect the food and shelter for various types of animals. Therefore, as the succession proceeds, be it primary succession or secondary succession, the number and types of animals and decomposers also change. So, at any particular time during primary or secondary succession, natural or human-induced disturbances like fire, deforestation, etc. can convert a particular serial stage of succession to an earlier stage. So, suppose during the process of succession, there is a disturbance that occurs during the process of succession, then it might be possible that the particular serial stage of succession gets converted to an earlier stage. There is a tendency for the moving backward into the opposite direction, where instead of where if there is a devastation happens during the process of succession, the species can convert a particular these disturbances can convert a particular serial stage of succession to an earlier stage. Also, such disturbances create new conditions. On the other hand, the same disturbances may create the new conditions that may encourage some species and discourage or eliminate the other species. So these are the basic differences between the primary and secondary succession. The primary succession, it occurs in places which are lifeless or barren. It occurs in places which has recently got deprived of living organisms and was previously inhabited. The time taken for the completion is very slow. It may be 1,000 years or more, while the time taken for the secondary succession is faster and it may be completed into the year in 100 or 200 years or so. Soil is absent in the beginning of the primary succession, while if I talk about the secondary succession, soil is present from the beginning of secondary succession along with some organisms. There is the presence of numerous intermediate serial communities in the primary succession, while in case of secondary succession, there are fewer presence of serial communities as compared to the primary succession. The environmental conditions are unstable especially in the beginning of the life. The environmental conditions are suitable and in the beginning of the life. Since the soil and some other organisms are already existing in that particular area, therefore the environmental conditions are suitable. So ultimately, the one common point between the primary and the secondary succession or any kind of succession is that either the succession starts in the land, which is known as the Girard succession, or in the water, which is known as the Hydrart succession. Both of these successions ultimately lead to the climax community, which is a mesic community which is neither completely on something which is not completely present in the water or not completely present in the on the land. So it is a middle community where it does not require a very large amount of water or a very large amount of soil, but requires a mixture of both. So now we will try to understand the succession by taking examples of plants. So the primary succession here is shown where hundreds of years are required by the plants to grow. So the succession starts from the bare rock where there is no soil. So the succession starts on the bare rock where there is no soil, and lichens may inhabit that particular area. That may came to this particular area from the surroundings. These lichens release some chemicals and that will break the soil, and ultimately over a period of 100 or 1,000 years, The soil is formed by different conditions, different weathering, process of different weathering, erosion, etc., and by the action of lichens. And when the soil is formed, small annual plants and lichens start growing there. Ultimately, the grasses and the perennials grow. Then the grasses, shrubs, and shade-intolerant trees such as pines grow, which are the intermediate species. Ultimately, we have a climax community where we have shade-tolerant trees such as oak and hemlock. So ultimately, it leads to the formation of a forest. So this was an example of primary succession. The succession in water is, as I mentioned, is known as the hydrar succession, and succession on the land is known as the Zerad succession. So the hydrar succession, so that there are different stages of hydrostasis starting from the phytoplankton. So firstly, the phytoplanktons arise, then we have rooted submerged stage, then we have rooted floating stage, then reed swamp stage, sedge meadow stage, woodland stage, and finally the forest stage. So there are different stages of hydrar succession starting from the bare bottom stage where there is no plant. Then some submerged vegetative plant starts growing. Then we have immersed vegetation stage that emerged out of water. Then we may have a temporary pond where we have uh, some swampy stage or sedge meadow stage. And then we have finally the climax forest stage where become a forest. So we see that even in the hydrar succession, the ultimate result is the forest stage or the climax stage is represented by the forest, or these forests are the magic community. If I talk about the Zerad succession, that is the succession that takes place on the land. So we have exposed rocks. Then the lichens came, inhabit those rocks. Then mosses came. So mosses, ferns, these comes and inhabit those barren rocks. Ultimately, grass start growing. So grasses and weeds come. Then we have mixed herbaceous plants, shrubs, young forest. Then we have mature forest. For example, as we discussed, example of primary succession. And ultimately, we have a climax forest of wheat and sugar. So this is an example of Zerad succession. Even in a case of Zerad succession, what we see is that the climax community is the forest. So be it the hydrar succession or the Zerad succession, the pioneering species in both are different, but the climax community is the basic condition represented by the trees. So in case of hydrar succession, phytoplanktons came, which are the pioneer species. Then we have free-floating angiosperms, then grasses and trees. So these free-floating angiosperms, grasses are the cereal communities, which are the intermediate communities. And then we have, in case of Zerad succession, we have lichens that are further then the land is inhabited by the bryophytes, herbaceous plants, shrubs, and ultimately by the trees. So with this, we had an idea about what is succession, what is the importance of succession, what are different ecological pyramids that exist in an ecosystem, and how the succession helps in the growing or inhabiting of new species or the elimination of some species from that particular area. So what is the importance of succession? What are different types of succession based on the time periods, and what are different types of succession based on whether it is taking place on land or in water. So based on this, we had primary and secondary succession, where the primary succession starts from the completely barren area, which is not even where the soil has not yet been formed and which is not inhabited by any organism previously. But in case of secondary succession, the succession that occurs in the area which has been destroyed due to some sudden flood, maybe where the soil is present, some organisms are present, but the community needs to stable or establish themselves again. So in that case, the secondary succession is faster, and therefore, the secondary succession is faster as compared to the primary succession. because already the soil is present and already some organisms are present that makes the secondary succession faster as compared to the primary. So we learn about different types of pyramids today. So we learn about ecological pyramids like pyramids of numbers, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy. Also we learn about the limitations of these ecological pyramids. And in the next lecture, we will learn about the last aspect of the ecosystem, which is the nutrient cycling. So in the next lecture, we will learn about different nutrients that are present in the environment and how these nutrients are cycled into the environment, like how these nutrients are taken up by the organisms, how they are utilized by the organisms, and ultimately they are recycled back into the environment. So in the next lecture, we will learn about the nutrient cycling. With this, I would like to end today's lecture on ecological pyramids and ecological succession. And thank you all for attending it and listening to it patiently. Thank you.